Australia are going to play Ireland, of course, in the third and final test in Sydney tomorrow morning. I'm delighted to say that Fiona Coghlan joins us on the line to discuss all of that. Morning to you, Fiona. Thanks a million for taking the call. I want to get straight into it. Sean Cronin is a person that we've spent a whole bunch of time speaking about on the show over the last couple of weeks, primarily in the context of where the hell is this guy's international career? What does it mean for his World Cup? It looked as if he was totally out of Joe Schmidt's plans. It's been an absolute roller coaster for him. I do understand the latest coming from Sydney was that he sat out the captain's run, I think, this morning, but it seems as if it's just precautionary, that he's going to be absolutely fine to take his place in the front row tomorrow. So he's gone from sub, he's gone from not being in the squad to starting this game tomorrow. I'd certainly assumed last week that was kind of it for him. What's your sense of Sean? I mean, it's only his 10th start in an Ireland jersey. What's your sense of where Sean Cronin is at in Joe Schmidt's grand plan?
I think the plan was always to give each of the hookers a start. Whether that was communicated to the players or not, I'm not too sure. But you know, he's 62 caps, 10 of them, as you said, were starts. So he is this impact bench player. This was his chance now to put his hand up and say, Rory Best isn't here, I can do it from the start. I just question, we see Sean Cronin and his dynamism and the impact that he makes when he does come off the bench. I just don't know whether he can consistently do it for a full game. You know, we see the big things he does, but Joe Schmidt is so into the little things off the ball, when you're off camera, basically, and that's what Joe's looking at. And I'm just not sure whether Sean's given that to him, and that's hence why he's been on the bench so much. Yeah,
and like even on that point, it's interesting reading Ronan O'Gara in the Irish Examiner this morning is talking about, you know, his explosive speed over 10 metres and what that offers. But like, you really sense that isn't, it's the thing that all of us lay people look at and we go, wow, geez, Sean Cronin had a great game today. But actually, Joe Schmidt is obviously looking at this. There's going to be a huge focus on his scrummaging and his work rate tomorrow, I'm guessing.
Well, that marker was laid down in Joe's comments during the week when he mentioned the scrum in particular. And I suppose that might go back to the first test when the penalty was given against the scrum, which is a tough call on him, you know, eight-person scrum and it's put down to the hooker. So it's a tough call on him. But I wouldn't say that it's the scrummaging that is really his weakness. I think it's more around the park and what he offers, as I said, off the ball, and what we're not seeing on the camera and what comes up in the stats as well.
Yeah, it must be
huge.
But
this whole thing that he set out the captain's run is kind of worrying. Yeah. That they said that they had a tough session 48 hours prior to a game, and he's the only player to be sitting out. I find a bit worrying. So unless he tweaks something and they're just going to observe it over the next 24 hours.
Are you seeing something different in Sean Cronin and how he benefits more from a Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster setup than how he benefits from a Joe Schmidt setup?
Not so much that. I just think Rory Best is that complete hooker with regards to hook work rate, and Cronin then is that impact player. Whereas in Leinster they probably don't have the likes of Rory Best there that Cronin is. Cronin is the starting hooker, and there's no one there to compete with him just yet, like James Tracy and the likes coming through. But that Cronin is the starting hooker in Leinster.
One of the other things we wanted to talk about, Fiona, was the shuffling around in the back row. So Peter Mahoney goes from blind side to open side, Stander from number 8 to blind side, and so Jack Conan then obviously comes in at 8, and that's probably the rationale behind the other two pieces of shuffling. So Mahoney has played the previous 2 tests at blind side over to the open side now, and we wonder, like, given particularly his success last week at the jackling and nullifying some of that Australian back row, we kind of wondered, you know, what impact that move is going to have on his capacity to influence the game in the same way that he did last week.
Yeah, I think if Levy was fit, Levy would definitely be starting. I think this is a forced change that Joe didn't want or envisage, but it is what it is. O'Mahony has been outstanding in the first 2 games. The first 50 minutes in the first test, he was excellent, and again last week he followed it up. I think there's been such a focus on the breakdown for the whole team that it kind of takes away the worry of that 7 in that area. But there's other elements, the lines and runs off set piece, you know, what's expected of him. Now, he's been around long enough to know what is expected of a 7, but it does put a bit of pressure on him. I think it was done also to balance the experience on either side of the flank to allow Conan get in, and it's a huge test for Conan. Like, he's had eight games he's come on 8 times for Ireland, and he hasn't really imposed himself like he's done at Leinster. Yes, it's a different level, but he is a player with huge speed off the base of the scrum. He's a skillful player as well. So hopefully with the 2 experienced guys on the flanks, that we'll hopefully see a little bit more Cronin getting involved in the game.
Is it easier to be that sort of a jackal player like that? I mean, Pocock template almost? Is it easier to be that jackal player at blindside, or like at 8, does it take a bit more effort to do that sort of thing? I mean, I'm just wondering if we're going to see a different sort of performance or a different expectation of the performance almost from O'Mahony this weekend.
No, I think he'll still go about his business and what's expected from him as a back row player. It's to be noted that Australia have changes in the back row as well, and Pocock's gone to 8, which changes his game slightly as well. So, you know, that change was made because of their line out. They brought in a line out jumper in Tui. So I don't think it's going to come down. Obviously, the breakdown is the key, but not so much a battle of the back rows. It's the whole team's performance around the breakdown, which was key in the second test.
Do you think Joe Schmidt is kind of happy that he's had to shuffle his back row? He's been presented now to a situation that may present itself in the World Cup where they may have to shuffle the pack. They may have to play people like Peter O'Mahony in a position he's not used to playing, or he's only played there once before in an Ireland jersey, because we know how injuries can hit in a World Cup.
I don't think Joe's ever happy when things don't go his way and he's not in control of the situation. But that's ultimately what's going to happen in a World Cup, and you can never, like, we're 15 months out from World Cup. The injuries are going to happen, hopefully not to frontline players, but if they do, we need players to slot in where they're needed and to do a job where they're needed. So it puts pressure on the coaching team, it puts pressure on the players, and it's what players stand up to that pressure, and that's going to be the key thing that Joe's going to be looking for.
What about some of the, like, in terms of some of those back, obviously there's enforced changes in the back as well, and Bundy Aki is back in the midfield, and Robbie Henshaw pushes out to 13. It's probably not the vintage series so far that we might have expected from Henshaw, from the performances that we would have seen previously. Aki obviously brings a little less subtlety almost to his play than like a Gary Ringrose might. Like, are we slightly weakened in those positions now from last week?
I wouldn't say weakened, I'd say different. Ringrose, we saw it in the Six Nations when he was out injured. He came back in for the Scotland game. He shored up defence in that 13 channel, and he offered something in attack as well. We saw in the first game, Henshaw coming back from injury. He was a bit rusty. He made some bad calls defensively. He wasn't involved in the game as much in attack as you would have liked to see him. I think Henshaw would have learned an awful, and a key, because he created opportunities, but he didn't make the right decision at the right time. So I think they'll have learned an awful lot from the first test, and they would have worked on a lot. But I still think that we're missing Gary Ringrose's, I suppose, creativity in attack and his control and just his understanding of defence. But I think the two boys would have learned a lot from the first test, and now it's pressure on them to see, can they put it into place.
Yeah, and I suppose in a lot of ways anyway, it's like the point about Joe Schmidt trying to prepare for a World Cup that we haven't, he surely has an ideal 15 players in his mind and where those players will play, but obviously over the course of the World Cup that tends to change as it goes, obviously. One thing that sort of interests me in terms of the bench, Fiona, you might talk a little bit about it, is obviously Ross Byrne's selection there, and I mean, it's good to see him get his opportunity. It's the only thing that sort of strikes me about it is that it's almost a bit of a thankless task. Like, in the fairly likely scenario that he comes on with about 10 or 15 minutes to go, we're either protecting a pretty tight lead or we're trying to chase a pretty tight deficit. So, like, in some regards, it's almost a bit of a thankless task for a guy who's coming in for his first cap.
Yeah, like it is, but he's played an awful lot of 10. He's been understudy, I suppose, to Sexton the whole way through Leinster's season when Carberry's been at fullback, so he'll have learnt an awful lot. I don't know how much will be expected of him if he is to come in at whatever stage. Obviously Joe's spoken a lot about him being key at 10 and 12, that he's been training there during the week. So the expectations on him, I only see him coming on if, God forbid, Johnny gets injured or we're in control of the game. So I don't think he'll come on. You think
really that if we get to sort of 70 minutes and it's tight, Johnny will see out the 80?
I think so. Right. Once he doesn't get injured or there's no tweaks, I think that he will. Like Joe wants to win this game. I think it's important for Ireland that they win this game, just for that momentum and for the development of the team and what they're trying to do. And it's well within them. Like Australia have performed well over the two tests, but Ireland are a better team. Australia have players that can change a game in the likes of Beale and Folau, but I think Ireland are definitely a better team.
That point is an interesting one, if you take it on from me, if you will. Just one quote from Joe Schmidt that sort of stood out for me from during the week, where he said that Ireland have a slightly different mindset going into this game, which, I don't know, look, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Sort of struck me that maybe this was an indication that winning wasn't necessarily everything. I'm not saying he wouldn't want to win it, but that winning from this game tomorrow or from this entire series isn't actually everything for him, that there is that thing about sort of betting players in. Is that your sense of it, or do you think this is a win at all costs for Ireland?
No, I don't think it's win at all costs. I definitely think he planned this tour to give players time to bed them in, and he has the World Cup in his sights, and he's always had the World Cup in his sights. However, in saying that, it has been disappointing the lack of game time that the Nines have got. In Cooney and Marmion 2 and 3 minutes each. Hopefully Marmion might get a little bit more time tomorrow, but from that development point of view, we're still lacking at that scrum half position. We have the players there that are coming through, but they're nowhere near the level that Murray are at, and they haven't been really thrown into that pressure environment yet. So we need to either see that tomorrow or we need to see it in the next 14 months.
Yeah, there definitely does seem like a less of an experimental attitude from the Australian camp. They've only made 2 changes for tomorrow, so that's, I guess, 17 different starters across 3 different tests, which isn't a whole pile. Like, would you read a lot into that at all, Fiona, that potentially the Australian mindset is more of a killer instinct?
Well, Checa needs the win, I suppose, because rugby over there is at a low. It's a sellout crowd, obviously, the weekend, but in general, it doesn't really take the public's eye or notice, and they're trying to rebuild Australian rugby, so a win against the second-ranked team in the world would be important for Checa and the direction he's going in the next 14 months as well.
Fiona, before we let you away, actually, let's get your prediction first of all. What are you thinking? Are you expecting Ireland to get it done in the morning?
I do think we'll win. It'll be close. I thought last week was disappointing the way we were so in control of the game, but really Australia could have pulled away and got it at the end. So I think we will win. It'll be close. It'll be a 1-score game.
All right. Before we do let you go, we did speak to you a few weeks back, yourself and Sophie Spence, about the IRFU's decision to ultimately turn down the opportunity for the women's team to go on tour in parallel alongside the men's team in Australia. There was very little forthcoming from the IRFU at that time beyond saying that they wanted to focus on the Novembers. And David Nucifora obviously has been out in the media this week. He's saying that it suited Australia more than it did us. He's saying that what was publicised in terms of the Australian offer to cover expenses wasn't exactly accurate. He says Ireland wouldn't have been at full strength going down there. He says that they look at the women's game as a 15s and as 7s combined, so that's an entirety thing almost, and that the game needs growth domestically. Does that give any further clarity to you in terms of the rationale behind this decision not to tour?
I totally agree with all the reasons David has come out with, but he spoke about the plan and the plan they're working off, and I've no doubt from a high performance perspective that there is a plan there and they are working off a plan, but as a whole thing, we're still waiting for this strategy. It was originally supposed to be out in June. It's now not coming out till September, I believe. There's been no reason given why it's not now coming out till September, so it's still a lack of transparency around it. And it's all well and good writing this plan. It's actually then the implementation of it which is most important. And I think the IRFU are going to have to do something drastic if they want to see the game grow to where it's capable of going. So we have to hold out now till September to see what's actually going to happen and then the implementation of it. But I fully agree with the reasoning behind turning down the tour, and I never actually had an issue with it. It was just a lack of transparency around it when they came out and said it doesn't fit our plan. Well, when no one knows what the plan is.
Yeah, and I mean, it will be interesting in September when the results of that report come out. I think we're all interested to see what's going to go on there. You talk about, like, he speaks about the growth of the game domestically. You've used the term there that something will have to happen drastically to turn this thing around. Like, what is that?
There is going to have to be an investment of money and resources at grassroots level. We need clubs to take responsibility. It can't be just one person in a club setting up a girls or a women's section, and then if they leave after 2 years it falls apart. So it has to be ingrained in the club, and unfortunately that's going to have to come from the top, that they stipulated under whatever rules, or whether it be financial reimbursement for having a women's team and ensuring the standard of coaching then coming through. A lot of the time it's the women are off to find their own coach. It's never the director of rugby in the club, so it's always kind of separate, which is a failing, and the women's side is separate. It has to be totally ingrained in the club if we want to see it grow at grassroots level.
Are you expecting, I mean, we can't really preempt exactly what's going to be in the report, but are you expecting to be, we can all point out the problems, obviously it's the solutions part of it that's the key. Are you expecting that we will see solutions and an actual sort of timeline of a plan out of that report? I do. I think they'll have taken. I would love to see them publish the review to know what the exact problems that they found, which I don't believe is going to happen. So it's hard to know. Obviously, we know what the problems are, but what they found from the review, it would be nice if they published that, and then we could see the improvements based on that coming into the strategy. But unfortunately, that isn't going to happen. I don't believe there's anyone sitting at the top table not wanting to see this improve. I just don't think there's anyone sitting there really advocating it, and I think that's an issue. Yeah, I think we can all get behind that. Fiona Coghlan, thanks a million for taking the call.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Fiona Coghlan, former Ireland captain, on the line there discussing all things Test rugby tomorrow, and obviously on the women's team as well, so we shall see how all that unfolds.